When you're setting up a gig and the bass just isn't hitting the way you imagined, it's easy to feel stuck between maybe I need a bigger sub and what if I pour cash into a unit that ends up gathering dust. I've been there standing in a rehearsal space, listening to a mix that looks perfect on the console but feels flat when the doors close. That hesitation is exactly why I wanted to break down the Mackie DRM 18S 18-inch stage subwoofer before you decide to drop a serious chunk of change on it. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of situation where a subwoofer like this actually moves the needle. In a mid-size club, a church worship band, or a mobile DJ setup that regularly fills a 1,000 square foot room, you need low-frequency reinforcement that can keep up with a full-range PA without sounding ragged. The DRM-18S is built around a 300-watt Class-D amp, which means it can deliver a lot of clean power without the heat and weight penalties of older Class AB designs. In practice, that translates to headroom. When you crank the low end on a kick drum or a synth bass line, there's less chance of the sub clipping and turning the vibe from punchy to mushy. One of the things that really separates this sub from a generic 18-inch box is the advanced Impulse DSP. Mackie has packed FIR filters and a tuning engine that let you shape the response to your venue's acoustic quirks. I've heard a couple of sound engineers mention how they can dial in a tight, focused sub roll-off to avoid muddying a small club's front-of-house mix, then switch to a broader curve for a larger hall without swapping hardware. It's not just a one-size-fits-all setting. The dashboard lets you store presets, so you can pull the right curve in seconds when you're hopping from a church service on Sunday to a wedding reception on Thursday. Now, the control interface itself is worth a mention. The DRM control dashboard is a single knob, color-coded display that lives on the front of the cabinet. For a touring tech who has to make quick adjustments between gigs, that simplicity is a real time saver. You don't have to fumble through menus on a laptop or carry a separate DSP box. The knob handles everything from volume to crossover frequency, and the color feedback tells you at a glance whether you're operating in the safe range or pushing the amp into its limits. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of real-world deployment. Picture a church worship team that runs a 12-channel mixer and a pair of Mackie SRM 450 mains. Adding the DRM-18S to the stack gives the congregation that deep, chest-vibrating bass you hear on recorded worship albums, but without drowning out the vocals. Because the unit has a universal 100240 VAC power supply with power factor correction, you can plug it straight into standard venue power in the US or Europe without needing a separate transformer. The only extra you'll need is a decent power cable and a solid grounding point to avoid hum. For a mobile DJ, the heavy-gauge steel grille and textured powder coat finish are more than just aesthetics. They're built to survive the rough fan tumble of loading trucks and setting up on uneven floors. The cabinet's weight, however, is a double-edged sword. At roughly 125 pounds, it's sturdy, but you'll need at least 2 people to lift it safely. If you're a solo performer who frequently gigs at coffee houses or pop-up events, that might be a deal-breaker. On the other hand, if your gigs consistently require a full-size sub, the robustness is a peace-of-mind factor you'll appreciate. So who should actually put this sub in their rig? If you're running a professional PA system for venues in the 5,000 to 2,000 person range, need consistent low-frequency power, and value the ability to tweak the response on the fly, the DRM-18S is a solid match. Its Class-D efficiency means you won't be constantly worrying about the amp overheating during a 4-hour set, and the DSP presets make it adaptable for different room sizes without a steep learning curve. Likewise, production companies that need a reliable, road-ready sub for touring theater or corporate events will find the combination of power, durability, and onboard control a worthwhile investment. Conversely, if your setup rarely ventures beyond a 300-person venue, or you primarily play acoustic-heavy gigs where sub-bass isn't critical, you'll likely be paying for power you'll never tap. A smaller 12-inch sub, or even a powered subwoofer with a lower wattage rating could give you the same perceived impact without the extra weight and price tag. Also, if you're a hobbyist who prefers a minimalist rack, the single-knob dashboard, while convenient, could feel limiting compared to a full-featured software DSP that you already own. Now, let's talk about the practical weaknesses that show up after you bring the unit home. The first is the need for a proper power outlet. Because it draws a lot of current at full output, you'll want a dedicated circuit to avoid tripping breakers during a high-energy set.